Thanks everybody for joining. It's reached past, so we will get going. Thank you for joining us today for this session where we will be busting the common myths about lean thinking and telling you all about the principles of lean thinking as well. Just a little bit about us and an introduction before we start. My name's Rhiannon Gibbs. I'm one of the two directors of Adesi, and we are a specialist business improvement consultancy. We work with organisations that have a social purpose. So that tends to be a lot of housing, a lot of charities, a lot of local authorities, health, criminal justice organisations. Some people brand what we do as change and transformation, which is true, as long as that change or transformation yields improvement. And unfortunately, not all change or transformation does. We're particularly proud of our staff who aren't career consultants. They haven't come straight out of university with an eye to being a consultant. They've all come from the sectors that I mentioned before that we work in, and they have been change managers. So they've been where you are now and have experienced the bumpy ride that is often improvement for themselves. And a lot of our work focuses around cultures within organisations and how to get the right culture in place to embed a culture of continuous improvement. As this is a webinar today, if you want to ask questions, if you want to discuss anything, you can use the chat bar, you can use the question and answers function, hopefully you can see on your screen, or you can raise your hand. Now, it's only me delivering this session today, so I will pause periodically and check those out to see if anybody has anything that they want to talk about, but I promise I will get round to everything, even if it is at the end. Marvellous, and without further ado then, we will get cracking. I'm just going to apologise in advance for these few slides. I swear this is the only sort of salesy show-offy thing we have in the session today. So these are some of the housing organisations that we've worked with. We were founded in 2004, but these are some of the organisations we've worked with over the past 8 years or so. So here's our sort of housing credentials, if you like, and these are some of the local authority, charity, health organisations we've worked with as well. And I can see that a couple of you actually hail from these organisations who have joined us today. So hello and thanks for coming along. Fantastic. So fundamentally, what we do at Adesi falls into these three categories. So our mission is to inspire organisations with a social purpose to continuously improve, and we do that three ways. So our most frequently or most sought after offer, if you like, is service improvement, and that might be a small end-to-end process. It might be a big value stream cutting across your organisation, but we do a lot of service improvement. We do a lot of work developing people and cultures. That might be establishing in-house change practitioners, in-house consultants, if you like. It might be making sure that every member of your staff understands lean principles and therefore can continuously improve the way they do their job every single day. It might be working with your leaders to establish a lean leadership culture. And we do a lot of, I suppose, that last organisation, optimize your organisational design is a lot more of the big transformation program stuff. Most big transformations start with some sort of operating model review, developing target operating models, assessing your current operating models, doing a gap analysis and putting plans in place to move you towards your target operating model. But fundamentally optimizing your organizational design. Okay, so that's just a little bit about us and what we do. And now, without further ado, I'm going to stop the video because I tend to move a lot when talking. It can be quite distracting. So I'm just going to pause the video. I will keep coming on and off so that you can see me at various points. But what we're here to look at today is this, the myths behind lean principles. So we're going to talk about what the myths are, what the lean principles really are, and why they're so awesome, how they get applied with examples, and lastly, sometimes why it doesn't work. So we cover this last point because organisations spend tens of thousands of pounds on transformation, and so it's only right to outline the points of failure so you can ensure you have all the critical success factors in place before embarking on any transformation yourselves. Now, just before I start, I'm going to launch a poll on your screen, which hopefully you can see now. This is just so I have an idea about your understanding of lean principles, so I know where to pitch the content of today's session. If I'm talking to a room of professionals, then I need to adjust my patter slightly. I do know a number of you on this call, so I know where to pitch it for you, but there's a number of people I don't know, so that's really helpful. Okay, so a couple of virgins, and a lot of people theoretical only, understand it with examples. Excellent. I can give plenty of examples as we go through today. Marvelous. Thank you very much. Excellent. Okay, super. Thank you. Right. Okay, let's look at these myths, and these might be things that are familiar to you. Certainly as a lean consultant, these are things I have heard a lot since starting with lean sort of 15 years ago. Let's tackle these one by one. The first one, the one that is probably most well known, is that lean is an efficiency program. It's about job cuts. You know, lean implies trimming the fat. That I must be the fat of the organization. It's a job cut program. Lean is mean, people say. And I'm just going to read you the myths to start with. I'm then going to explain lean principles, and we're going to come back to these at the end and specifically address each and every single one. So the first one is that it's an efficiency program. The second one is about it being a tool set. It's a bunch of tools that you use. The next one is it's all about the processes within an organization. It only applies to manufacturing, specifically car manufacturing, because you may or may not know lean came from Toyota originally. Well, the principles, behind lean came from something called the Toyota production system. So people make this assumption that it only applies to manufacturing. The next one is something that any lean thinker hates to hear. And it goes something like, oh, yes, we've done lean, implying lean is a project. It's something you can pick up and do. And that has to be an absolute bugbear. If you ever meet me and hear someone say that, you'll notice a sort of, expression across my face. And lastly, you need lots of expensive consultants. And yes, I know the irony of a consultant pointing that out, but we are continuous improvement experts and believers first and foremost. And I will tackle this specifically, as I say, at the end. So those are the myths. Let's now look at what lean can do for you. And this part of the presentation always reminds me a little bit of the generation game. Do you remember that with Bruce Forsyth? When all the prizes would whip by the consultants on that conveyor belt right at the end. So this is what lean principles can do to you. So lean fundamentally allows organizations to deliver more at a lower cost by focusing on value-adding activities and eliminating waste. Or you could say, deliver much more value for the same cost. And we will tackle some of these words like value and waste as we go through. But lean also streamlines and simplifies your processes. It makes things much calmer. So there's less frantic activity and fewer heroics, to get by day to day. And things happen quicker. There is less waiting, which results in a reduced cycle time for all processes. It provides clarity on the right person to do the right job at the right level at the right time, and reduces errors, rework, firefighting, increases staff engagement and motivation, and increases productivity and quality. So it's kind of like the nirvana, really, of business delivery. And I'm going to say it now, it's a myth that quality, cost, and speed are mutually exclusive, and that you can't have all three of those things, because that is exactly what adopting lean principles will allow you to do. It gives you better quality outputs or services, more satisfied customers, and it makes it cheaper to deliver your services that also get delivered faster. So now I've made that rather bold statement, I'm going to give you an insight into how it is possible to make that happen by running through a real example. And what you should see, there we go, on the screen is a diagram that's supposed to be a bar chart, by the way. And we get many clients that come to us and describe this scenario. And what this is fundamentally showing us is that demand, which is all the stuff that comes in, all the demand for work, outstrips the capacity or the resource you have to meet that demand. And most teams suggest that basically they have too much work to do. And this isn't a theoretical problem. This is a real problem that most organizations can go away and evidence. They can say, Here is an actual count of how much work is coming in and how much resource it would take to consume that, to complete that demand. And here is the number of hours in people power we have in a day. And you can see one is bigger than the other. Okay. And if this was the good old days and you went to your boss and you evidenced this problem, their first response is often that we need more staff. Okay. There's the gap we have in terms of demand and capacity. And so we're going to add extra resource. Okay. But what happens when we get new staff is that the productivity of the existing staff goes down because they are having to support that new staff. That group of new staff aren't able to get up and running and fully productive straight away. They need training, they need coaching, they need guidance. They have a lack of knowledge and experience. They interrupt more experienced staff. And so you have a reduced productivity, which impacts your capacity. Certainly for a short interim time, that is absolutely true. And you really see this in somewhere like a contact center, where this demand to capacity can be seen at its most simple. Demand are phone calls, let's say, coming in, and capacity is the number of people to answer the calls. And I've had contact center managers in the past describe this problem to me with demand and capacity and say, but I can't actually afford to take on more staff, not because I don't have the money to do so, but because I can't actually let productivity slip any further because I don't have the capacity to train the new people. So they're in an absolute catch-22 situation. So you end up with less resource than you got. So you still have a gap between your demand and capacity, which means the extra resource only delivers part of the expected capacity to cope with demand. So what happens now? Do we hire more resources? And is it likely to be given everything going on in the world at the moment and pressures with budgets and the constraints that there are? No. To be frank, you were unlikely to be given the first lot of resource, but let's look at how we could adjust this formula here, the demand and capacity equation, let's say, without increasing our capacity. So the first thing we do is we break down this demand, we break down our demand, into two types. The first is failure demand, and the second one is value add demand. Now, failure demand is everything that's caused by a failure within your process. It might be a failure to do something, to respond to someone, or it might be getting something wrong that then requires a customer to come back and challenge something. Value add demand is the demand that your team was set up to meet. So if you are a call center taking, what sectors have we got here? If you were a call center taking repairs calls, because I can see a number of housing people here, then the call to log the repair first time would be value add demand. If you are taking a call to chase where the operative is, or to get an update, or to report the repair for a second time because actually it subsequently broke again very quickly, that would be failure demands. I can see we've also got local authority. So, okay, value add demand would be somebody phoning up to request a new recycle bin. Because, well, certainly in my local authority, you're allowed to have two. Oh, no, actually, let's use green waste as an example because people have to pay for those. So somebody phoning up to request and purchase a green waste bin. Failure demand would be them phoning up to chase where it is, phoning to complain it hasn't been picked up. You see things like that, driven by failure within your process. Okay, and I'm going to give examples of this in the healthcare sector in a moment. In the charity sector, then, value add demand would be things like if you're a supporter care team, it would be the supporter phoning up to register for an event. Failure demand would be that person phoning up to query when the event is because they can't find the information on your website, or phoning up to ask where their t-shirt is, or things like that. Okay, so hopefully that gives a selection of examples from the people that are here today. So the first question I have for you, because the objective here is to measure, analyze, remove and reduce failure demand, because then we have less work demand for that capacity to need to deal with. So we want to understand fundamentally what failure demand is, what's causing it. We need to find its root cause and then take it out. Okay, so the one challenge I always make at this point is how many of you currently do that? And I know this is a webinar, but just reflect. Do you currently measure the failure demand that comes in and hits your team? Do you know how much it is? Because that has to be the first measure you put in place if you want to manage this demand and capacity equation more effectively. Okay, and the irony here is that those new staff that we talked about hiring before, the ones that actually didn't end up meeting all the demand and actually sucked a little bit of existing capacity, create more failure demand because they're not doing everything perfectly first time, because they are new to the role. They give, some incorrect advice. Which ends up creating more failure demand. So you can see that the solution of hiring more people, actually, you end up pretty much exactly where you started again, with more demand than capacity. Okay, I am keeping an eye on the chat and the Q&A. So if anybody has anything to add or any questions, please use those or raise your hand. I am keeping an eye on all three of those as we go through. Okay, but now let's jump across the other side. I'm going to talk about capacity. Capacity splits into three: value add activity, business essential non-value add activity, and waste, basically. And business essential non-value add and non-value add are both types of waste. But let's start with value add. Value add is always in the view of your customer, for one. And for activities to be considered value adding, it must meet three criteria. So it has to be something that the customer is willing to pay for. It has to physically transform your product or service, and it has to be done right first time. So just to add some context to that, if you were dealing with a complaint would always be failure demand. A complaint always comes from something that didn't go right the first time. So you can never have any value add activity when dealing with failure demand. It's always waste because it was not done right the first time. Does that make sense? So all time spent dealing with complaints is waste. If you want a good complaint strategy, it's to reduce and remove complaints as far as possible, not handle them better. So in order for something to be considered value adding, it has to meet these three criteria. It has to be work the customer is willing to pay for. It has to transform the product or service, and it has to be done right first time. So again, let's take some examples from the sectors on this call. So in housing, so if you are doing repairs, the actual repair to the property, is what the customer would probably pay for. It transforms your service and what they're looking at, as long as that repair is done right first time. Okay. In the charity sector, the phone call to book onto an event, so doing that phone call, taking that phone call would actually be value adding. And back in the local authority again, the bins actually being collected and the rubbish taking out of it would be value adding as well. Okay, the business essential non-value adding and the non-value add is everything else. Okay, it's all the other things that we do within a process that doesn't add value. And with the non-value add, it's things that you just want to straightforward eliminate from your process. And I'm going to talk about ways to identify this straightforward non-value adding activity in just a moment. And then we have this business essential non-value add. It's a slight grey area. It's definitely not value add activity, but it is business essential waste. So things like training. Okay, it's not something the customer would be prepared to pay for. It doesn't transform their product or service. So training, things like expenses, all of those wouldn't be value adding, but things like recording in a CRM as well, we would call those business essential non-value add. They're things you're told you have to do. They are essential to the running of the business, but they do not add value. Okay, so if we say our capacity then breaks down into these three activities, our objective is to improve our processes and services. So we remove waste, reduce time spent on that non-value adding activity, which then gives us more capacity to spend on value adding activity. I can see I've got something in the Q&A. Where would business reporting sit? Oh, great question. Let me just put myself back on. Hi, Chris. So business reporting would be business essential non-value adding. Doesn't benefit the customer in any way, shape or form. But it's something you do because you're told you need to do it. Now, don't get me wrong, there is efficient ways of doing business reporting. It could take, I've worked in organizations where they have 5 FTEs in an organization of a few hundred, doing business reporting. So it's not done particularly efficiently. But then you might have, 1 FTE that spends half their time doing it in an organization of the same size. The point is, in both those scenarios, it's still business essential non-value adding activity. So you want to reduce the amount of time you spend doing that activity as far as you possibly can by making it more efficient. And even if you manage to get to a point where it's a live dashboard and the intervention to make it happen is just one button click a month, then that's fantastic. That button click is the only business essential non-value adding activity that you have. So the idea is to reduce the amount of time you spend doing that as far as possible, because it isn't fundamentally value adding. Is that okay? Okay. If you follow up, I will absolutely come back to it. So that's how we look to address this equation. We reduce our failure demand, which means we have less work hitting the team. We then reduce the amount of things that our team spend their time doing. So we reduce the waste in the process. So we have more time to do the value adding things, which means we end up with more capacity and reduced demand. Okay. And as I say, the easiest way to see that is looking at something like a contact center. Yeah, if I reduce the number of chasing calls and things like that, then if I reduce the amount of time people have to spend doing their system wrap-ups and their recording, they have more time to take the calls and they have less calls coming in the first place. Okay, excellent. So I read a stat, or I saw on a TED talk or something that said that people only ever remember 10% of any training they attend. So we're here for about an hour this morning. You're going to remember about 6 minutes of what I say, hopefully more, and you'll get the recording. But 6%, make the 6 minutes of what you remember this statement about what is lean thinking. That bit in orange is the most important thing I'm going to say today, which is why I'm going to read it verbatim as on the slide, which I don't usually like to do, but it's taken us a long time to craft this sentence. And so lean is a systematic, continuous improvement philosophy that focuses activities. God, you think I'd get it right after all these years. That focuses activities on reducing waste while aligning processes to customer value. Okay, so it is not a project. It is not a tool. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of behaving that means you're constantly looking for waste and aligning what you do to the things your customers value. Now, there's lots of points in there, like customer value. So in order to do that, you have to be able to say, who is your customer? Now, you might think that's a really easy question. And for many of you, it is an easy question. It might be your resident, your leaseholder, your supporter, your beneficiary, your somebody that lives within your council, your patient. I come from a criminal justice background. Don't get me wrong, I've been doing this a lot longer than I ever did the criminal justice role. But go into a court setting, legal setting, and identifying the customer actually depends at what point in the proceedings you are looking, because there are points where the defendant is the customer, where the victim is the customer, where the general public are the customer. So it can be quite a difficult question sometimes to answer, but you have to identify the customer and you have to be able to say, what do they value? So remember, that is, what would they pay for? How does it transform their service or product? And it has to be done right first time. So we take that customer perspective. You have to involve employees in continuous improvement and problem solving activities. This isn't something that you can do for people. A lean organization have employees that basically have two jobs to do what they were hired to do. So if that's income processing, or if it is waste collection, or if it's nursing, they have that job. But their other job is to improve the way they do their job every single day. And that's what we mean by continuous improvement. It's not project after project. It means every day we get a little bit better. And we do that through problem solving and identifying improvements. And as I say, it can't be done to staff. You can't think I can do lean and just ignore the front line. It doesn't work like that. Managers can't do this improvement for the staff. Consultants can't do this improvement for the staff. We can encourage and support, as can leaders, but it has to be the employees that do the doing. It's also about rapid continual improvement. Certainly when I was in the criminal justice sector, we used to have meetings for the sake of meetings to discuss changes that were years down the line. And of course, nothing ever really changed. We very much believe, or lean very much is of the opinion that, a small improvement implemented now is better for that perfect solution that never comes along. So if you can make something 1% better today, 0.5% better today, tiny fraction better today, do it, rather than waiting for what is usually some big systematic or system change in the pipeline. So it's all about that implementation rather than prolonged planning. We look to make lots of things more simple, mainly because you're looking at things from a customer perspective. And when you look at things from a customer's perspective, it is much simpler. It's organizations that add the complexity behind the scenes. And lean also very much advocates the use of metrics and visual controls wherever possible to get instant feedback on whether things are working, so it can aid real-time decision-making and problem solving. So if you put something in place, an improvement today, you should have data tomorrow that tells you whether it's working or not. Okay, so that was your, well, it's actually less than 6 minutes. You can remember a bit more than this, but that's one of the most important things that you need to remember. So memory cameras and click. And the term lean was coined by two chaps, Womack and Jones, who wrote a book called The Machine That Changed the World. And they were observing manufacturing principles with car manufacturers. And they then coined this phrase lean for what they were observing. And they talked about 5 guiding principles. So think of this like the continuous improvement cycle, where you focus on customer value instead of how good things are internally. So first of all, you identify who your customers are and establish what value they have. We then map the end-to-end process, warts and all. That's often referred to as a value stream, and you'll hear us talk about value streams as well. And a value stream is different to a process. It looks from end to end from a customer point of view, which might mean you cut across many different organizations, which is one of the reasons that A, doing lean is so worthwhile, but B, why it can be quite complex at times and why people don't do it properly. So I'm going to give an example about a patient that needs treating in a GP surgery in a moment. And you'll see how that cuts across not just the GP processes, but also into people like the pharmacy. So you map that end-to-end process, warts and all. By warts and all, we mean everything that goes wrong as well. You don't map how things should be. And that's one of the biggest problems I have with process maps. Is process maps are great for showing how things should be done. As a learning aid, as a training aid, they're fantastic. For actually analysing what's happening and where value is added, you need a value stream. Okay, so we need to map the end-to-end process, warts and all, with all the problems. We put lots and lots of numbers on a value stream, and then we've got that completed. We then want to make that value flow through the process with little to no interruptions, but that's almost impossible. But it's about making it flow through the remaining value add steps. How can you jump from each value adding step to another with as little interruptions as possible? You also want to pull between the steps where we can have that flow being continuous. So rather than pushing work from stage to stage or organization to organization, you want people to take work when they're ready for it, because that stops a lot of that overburden on people and teams. And then we want to search for perfection with no waste. So that's where we have to have those people engaged in continuous improvement, because you want them to be continuously looking at their value streams and their processes, identifying and taking out waste. Okay, and round we go again. Yeah, it never stops. Continual improvement means sort of step change. Continuous improvement means it just never stops. Okay, so those are the original 5 guiding principles coined in the 1990s, as I say, by Womack and Jones. That book, The Machine That Changed the World, it's definitely worth a read. It is really interesting to see where all this came from. Now, you can see in there, I mean, we've talked about value and we've talked about customers. I've not talked a lot about waste yet. So waste comes fundamentally in 3 forms. We have unevenness. So unevenness is variation within the process. So peaks and troughs. So if I was looking at, again, a medical setting, you might say it's winter peaks in prescriptions or an after work rush to pick things up. In housing, you would say, is when the gas checks are completed every year. We have an unevenness. Everybody turns on their boiler and we need to go out and complete a load of gas repairs. You might say it's the summer rush to sell your property or to move into your new property. In charities, it would be the peak of people booking onto an event as you launch it. Overburden then is stress on people or machines. So that can be things like single people dependencies, where you've got a bottleneck within your organization, people that are overworked. We talk that overburden. And then you have the classic 7 wastes, which is often where we start with staff in an organization, because they can be easy to explain and easy to identify. And the 7 wastes are identified on this slide, as you can see in front of you. And it starts with the one that's probably hardest to identify and the hardest to recognize as a waste. But once you do, it's kind of like a light bulb being switched on. Once you identify this as a waste, it makes so much more sense. Everything makes much more sense. And I should say before we start that waste is everything, as we said, that does not add value to your product or service. Services in your cases, of course. Every activity in your organization, everything that everybody does either adds value or cost, because waste means resource, which means spending money on something, so therefore waste. Okay, so let's look at these wastes. The first one, as I say, hardest to recognize, this is a bit of a light bulb one, is overproduction. So doing too much or doing it too fast. So when we say things like, we're just going to get ahead of ourselves, or, when charities, for example, go to print leaflets, or any organization goes to print leaflets, because a lot of organizations still do. And you see on the website that it says, you can have 1,000 for $9.99 or 2,000 for $11.99. And you do the $11.99 because that's good value for money, right? But actually, we've now got to store those extra leaflets. We've done too much, okay? Overproduction creates all the other wastes in its wake. So overproduction, we should never do too much of something or do it too fast. So by too fast, I mean, so the next stage of the process isn't ready. Ideally, you want to do everything just in time. So again, I can see we have some people from housing here today, in fact, probably more housing than anyone else. So apologies to everybody else. I'm going to use a housing phrase here. So there's this thing in housing where we have void properties. Void properties are basically empty properties. Somebody wants to move out. And when they move out, we have to turn around the property. So take it back to a basic standard, ready for somebody new to move in. And we call that a void while it's empty, because we're not getting rent for it during that period. Now, classic overproduction in housing is when there's nobody lined up for a property. So lettings team haven't found a new resident for that property, but property services go ahead and turn it around anyway. Okay, and that's fairly typical in housing. But actually what they've done is they've done their bit of the process too fast. Because quite often what often happens is because they've done that, if you can't find somebody for that property, the grass overgrows, the windows get smashed, and you have to come back and do more work to it when you actually do find someone for the property. So again, you're better off doing it just in time. Yes, we know this is a high demand property, so please go ahead and do that. Or yes, we know there's somebody that wants that in a couple of weeks, go ahead and work on that property now, rather than just, I've got this property, I'm going to do the work on it. So apologies for that being a housing example. Hopefully that made sense to everybody. So overproduction. Second waste is waiting. I suppose it's much easier to identify waiting. And it doesn't mean that I think people sit there twiddling their thumbs. It can be delay within a process. So we are waiting for sign off from somebody. We are waiting for somebody to complete a form and send it back to us. I know you're doing other things with your time, but that particular process is idling. That particular customer's process is idling. There's a delay there. The third one is excess processing. I like the way this is often described, where people say it's like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. So it's extra steps completed to get to your end product that don't add value. So this is often things like checking. Checking would be excess processing. Yeah, we've done the work. Why are we needing to check it multiple times? It might be recording in multiple places. Certainly 10 years ago, this was absolutely prevalent in the sectors that we work in. You'd find that people would record on the CRM system, and they'd also record in their spreadsheet because they don't trust the IT system, or it might go down and we'd lose all the records. So they would record in multiple places. I even came across an authority once that also recorded in a blue book as well. So they recorded in 3 places. And I've seen that in health as well. So that's an example of excess processing. If you do more than you need to get the outcome you require. This is now we start to get a little bit unreasonable. Things like transportation. So if you're moving things around for processing, that is transportation. Now, one of the things COVID has done is it's made us, work in a much more virtual way. So we don't have as many things that we need to move around for processing now. We don't walk files from one place to another. So there's less transportation. But if we were moving bits and pieces around between different team members or different teams and physically walking things around the building for signatures or invoices for sign off, then that would be transportation. Inventory is any work in progress that's not being actively worked on right now. So I'm hugely appreciative that so many of you have given up your Friday morning to join our webinar. But, as you're sat here with me, in your inbox and your CRM trays, there's probably ping, 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 work stacking up. In the old days, it used to be in and out trays. That's work in progress, stuff you're doing that isn't being actively worked on at the moment. Okay. We've then got motion. So any physical movement you do to perform your roles. Now, I'm going to address this before somebody pops it in the chat, because I always get this one at this point, which is surely in order to be healthy and encourage a positive work environment, we want people to be moving around, and absolutely you do. Okay, I'm not suggesting for a moment that you all stay tied to your chairs all day. What I'm saying is that you don't want motion to be necessary in your work, because that is waste. So for example, I had a client once who had a 12th floor building, and they centralized the printing banks on every other floor. So that meant if you were on the odd floors or the even floors, or whichever ones didn't have the printers on, you had to go up or down the stairs to pick up your printing. These days, it tends to be centralized bins, right? You have to get up every time you have some rubbish to put it in these centralized bins, but that's all motion. Of course, we used to have a lot of traveling around for meetings. A couple of years back, pre-COVID, a lot of people wouldn't have thought anything about traveling 2 hours for a half-hour meeting and then traveling 2 hours back. But that was motion, time spent physically moving to perform your role. All of that is waste. Save all of that time and take a proper break. That way you get to be, nice and healthy and probably get some fresh air at the same time. And lastly, probably the most recognizable, defects. So errors and rework, if you like. Any time spent producing stuff that gets rejected and all the time spent subsequently correcting it. All of those would be wastes as well. Okay, so recording into a system just to have it changed later. Right, and I can see I've just got another question. Would backlogs in work be inventory? Absolutely. Really good example, Chris. Backlogs in work is inventory. Yeah, and stacked work, it's all a waste, because while it's not being worked on, it's idle. It's waiting there. And what we want to try and do is have a pull process. It's a good example of a pull where you can just move between those value add stages as quick as possible. Now, the one thing I would say about lean is it is so simple in concept, but not easy to do. Okay, so backlogs of work are an inventory. You've got people waiting for things to happen. They've entered your process somewhere, whether that's through a web form or through a phone call, whether another team's already dealt with them. But yes, anything that's not being worked on at that moment in time is absolutely a waste. Thank you, Chris. That's a really good example. Okay, jolly good. So I'm going to give you an example now. Which is, and I've tried to pick an example because I could see the sectors that you're all from today before you joined the call. And because you're from sort of housing, local authorities, health, and charities, I decided to pick an example that you'll have all been involved in rather than that you do for work. So apologies, I couldn't think of an example other than things like finance that you'd all be involved in from a work point of view. But I'm sure at some point in your life, very lucky if not, you've had to go to a doctor and a pharmacy to pick up medication for some hopefully very minor ailments that you've got. So that's why I've picked this example. So the value stream we're looking at is treating patient ailments. Okay, a value stream that cuts across the GP. You book your appointment with your GP right through until you pick up and take your medication at the other end. Okay, so the customer is your patients. They value a cure for their ailment. Okay, so the right treatment and advice being provided. Now, I want to hone in a little bit on the pharmacy side of things, okay? Because if we didn't look at this as a value stream and we looked at it as a process, the pharmacy probably would have said that what the customer, values is the right medication being given in the right quantities where they request it. And that's right, but actually in the value stream, the patients value the cure, okay? But the pharmacy needs to make sure they give the customer the right medication in the right quantities when they request it in order to fulfill their part of that process. But that's only good if the diagnosis and treatment is right in the first place from the GP. So do you see how that value stream cuts across the two organisations? So in order to improve that experience end to end for the customer, you would need to involve both parties in that value stream. So what I've done is I've taken the pharmacy bit of the process, okay? And hopefully you've experienced this or been to pick up medication for somebody else and experienced this in some way, shape or form. But my experience tends to be this. So you're finished with the GP and they say, which pharmacy are you at? I'm going to send the prescription there now. And they now send it electronically to the pharmacy, which is marvelous because I don't have to carry pieces of paper with me. Now, there's sort of two variations now of the process. That arrives at the pharmacy, and if they have time, they make the prescription up ready for when you arrive, but only if they have time. Now, what happens is the customer arrives and requests their prescription. The pharmacist checks the stock. The customer confirms their identity and pays for the prescription if they need to. If the pharmacy hasn't made up that prescription, then they make it up there. Or if they have, they pick it up from the ready-made box. They check the customer identity again, because there may well have been a lag here. And they may have gone away, may have come back, but they check the identity again, hand it to the customer. And quite often as they're doing that, they say, take 3 a day, make sure you've eaten first. And they give that additional advice about how to take the medication successfully, because most people won't read those little packets inside. Okay, hopefully that's fairly similar to what you've experienced. So let's look at what some of the waste is you see in that process. And this is why once you become familiar with waste and lean principles, you can't help but see waste everywhere. Okay, so I made up this example for this session today, and I had 3 slides of waste originally. And what I've done is I've just picked up a couple to share with you now, because I can just see all the different waste that comes from this process. So they check the customer identity multiple times. That's excess processing. Yeah, they do it for different reasons, but it's still doing it more than once. So quite often the customer doesn't show up, so the medication needs to go back on the shelves. and they put them in labeled bags with your name and address, and so they go in the bin. So that's overproduction. You did that early because you did that step before you needed to. There's potential waste there. We get that unevenness. If you remember the 3 types of waste we talked about originally, rather than the 7 wastes, we've got that peaks and troughs of customer demand in the pharmacy. So lunchtime is always busy. After work is always really busy for collection as well, because you might have spoken to the GP on the phone and they faxed it through and you pick it up on your way home. So you end up with that unevenness in your process. Quite often, the pharmacy will run out of the medication you need and they have to order additional stock for urgent delivery. So then you've got waiting and transportation. The pharmacist might have to cover the desk for an assistant that is off sick. There is an 8th waste that's often disputed about underutilised talent. So not using the talent you've got in the right ways. And I've put this in as an example because I do see this quite a lot. So we have a qualified pharmacist, but actually they're having to also man the desk. So they have less time now to do the value adding, the bit that they are qualified to do. So that's just an 8th waste to bear in mind. We've got some medication that goes out of date and needs throwing out. So that was inventory. Yeah, things sat on the shelf, not being used, inventory. The customer might be allergic or unable to take the medication as prescribed. So the doctor didn't check those things, which would be a defect, so an error. And of course, correcting that error is also a defect. We might have the customer leaving the pharmacy while they're waiting, and then they might need tracking down, or the pharmacist, shouting out, is Mrs. Gibbs here? Is Mrs. Gibbs here? Moving around the pharmacy, trying to find the right person. You've got the pharmacist moving around the medication area, around the shelves to collect the medication and place it in the completion tray, and that's motion. And so you can correct that by setting up in an optimized way. And of course, I've had this personally. The prescription goes to the wrong pharmacy, despite the doctor checking with you. There's more than one village pharmacy. So then we've got excess processing, we've got transportation, we've got motion, we've got defects, we've got inventory. Okay, so quite a lot of problems, things that go wrong, yield more than one type of waste. Okay, and some of these you see and some of these you don't because they're behind the scenes. But these are just some examples of waste that you get in those processes. Okay. Checking, I'm not seeing anything going up, so I'm going to move on. Hopefully that's a useful example. We have many examples. If you want to give me a call after today or drop me a line, I can come up with lots of examples for your individual sectors. So please do feel free to get in touch. So lean is fundamentally 3 things. It's this philosophy first and foremost about focusing on that customer value to drive everything that you do. It's also about measuring things mercilessly. So we very much hate targets and don't believe in them at all. Applying things like 80% thresholds to things does nobody any good. You have to define perfection for every process, and then you have to be continuously dissatisfied with anything sub-perfect. Okay, and that creates an improvement culture. Now, I wish I had time to go into this today, but this would expand it by a couple of hours. So I'm going to recommend you go on our website. And if you've not attended our session on measurement that we've run recently, there's an option on the website to request a copy of the recording, and you'll get a copy of that recording because we talk a lot about this concept of measuring mercilessly in there. So there's a recommendation for you. It's free, obviously, so go help yourself. And this respect for people, this respect that you can't do this to people, and that the frontline staff, and staff within the organisation are the ones that understand your services best and have to do the improvement work. The respect for your customer. So respect for people is absolutely underpins everything lean related. And there are tools. It was one of our myths, okay? But there are tools, and there are hundreds. Honestly, I could recommend to you books and books and books and books with tools in. And what they all do the same things. They help you identify value and reduce non-value added time, to do things like map processes and value streams and eliminate waste, and to do it quickly, involving everybody you need to involve. But the exact tool you use doesn't matter. I can recommend tools to you, and good consultant will have an arsenal of tools to use at particular points, but the tools just help you deliver the philosophy. You get some people that get very hung up on the tools. The tools is a means to achieve the philosophy. Okay. Excellent. Sorry, I've got another question. As a simple start, would you just want to work with the team to identify waste activities and just count them? Yes, absolutely. I think the most powerful thing you could do with a team, if you wanted to introduce them to lean concepts in a very simple way without scaring people, is introduce them to the 7 wastes. And after today, I'm going to send you a sort of infographic about the 7 wastes with a tortoise and a hare on it, but it will make sense when you see it. And introduce them to the concept of the waste, and maybe just put up a flip chart or a virtual flip chart or a board somewhere that your team can look at and just get them to spot it. And being able to recognize it in your own processes is the most useful thing you can do. People are often very quick to point out waste generated by other people. It's hard to be more self-reflecting, but it's hard to influence waste other people create, whereas we can absolutely control the waste within our control. So yeah, fantastic way to get started from today. Introduce the concepts of the 7 wastes in particular. Don't worry about overburden and unevenness for now. Focus on the 7 wastes and get staff identifying them. But yeah, so the tools are just an enabler for the philosophy. You could use any tool, you could make up your own as long as it helped you achieve the philosophy. And then there's very much a management culture. The only lean programs I've seen fail are because of a poor management culture. We talk about servant leadership with lean culture, one where the leadership are there to enable the frontline staff. They coach and enable people to be able to do their job. Their job is to remove all the barriers from your people being able to do an excellent job. And I think it was Richard Branson that said, look after your people and your people will look after your customers. And I think that's an incredibly important, message and underpinning principle fully. So the whole philosophy fits together in this sort of house shape. Some people call it the lean temple. I don't expect you to print it out and pop it on your wall and put candles around it like we do. No, I'm only kidding. But this explains how everything fits together. And it all starts with this lean foundation. I don't know if you can see my cursor on the screen, but this bit at the bottom, the lean foundation, sometimes called the stability tools. And it's about making sure you have the right underpinning factors in place in your organization. So, reliability is, are your processes standardized? Are they audited? Do we write them down? Do people do things in the same way? Do we have the right measures in place? Have we removed targets as your key success indicators? Can we evidence whether things are working or not? Overall effectiveness is, do we look at productivity? Do we look at removing waste day to day to increase our productivity? And visual management, how well do we have visual indicators as to whether things are going well or not day to day? And those are some of the essential founding things you need in place before you really embark on any significant service improvement. And that's what a lot of organizations unfortunately do. And the pillars here, flow and pull and error free, are basically how you design processes and services. And lots of organizations embark on service improvement, process improvement, without the foundations being in place. And the net result of doing that is that you get a better process for a time. Okay. But what happens over time is that because you're not measuring it the right way, because it's not standardized, because you're not looking at productivity and removing waste, over time, that process degrades and people go back to doing things the way they used to. And because you haven't established good problem solving, people put their own solutions in place. And before you know where you are, everybody's not doing things the same way and it's no longer working. So it degrades over time. The foundation ensures that any improvement work you do is sustainable and continuously improving. We've then got the roof of the temple, and these are the leadership principles. These are the 5 guiding principles for leaders. It's about encouraging teamwork. It's about going and seeing. And when I say teamwork, sorry, I don't mean just within a team, cross team working, working throughout those value streams, that focus on that customer. Your job is to encourage that. It's to go and see problems and processes. You cannot support your staff and problem solve from behind a desk. You have to be where the action is. You have to respect the front line. Your job is not to design processes, it's to support your staff to do so. So when they say we'd be better off doing it this way, there has to be that respect. But you are there to challenge the status quo. There are lots of, myths in organizations and things that people do because it's how you've always done it or because we can't possibly change this. And your role is to challenge that. and to say, well, I know we've always done it this way, but have you considered? And of course, to support that continuous improvement. Okay, so that is the lean temple. That's how everything fits together, but only with that leadership culture, only with the process work, and critically with the lean foundations in place. Do you get this culture of people-driven continuous improvement, a lean culture? All of those things have to be in place. You can't do the process without the foundation and the leadership, or in any other sequence for that matter. It all has to be present. So I've got a slide here. I'm just conscious of time because I'm sure everybody is due to go on other calls in 5 minutes. So in the slide pack that you'll see, we have this point about using lean tools versus a full transformation. So becoming a lean organization. Okay, and basically using the tools is usually about short-term performance issues. It creates a step change, but will often stall. You're dependent upon external people to deliver change. What I would say is that it's good for proof of concept. Okay, if you want a proof of concept that this stuff works, that you can have it all, as I described at the start, use the tools to start with. Most people start there, but they move on to a full transformation. They soon realize that actually it's something you want across your whole organization. And then you need to look at things like creating internal skills and change capability, and about changing cultures. Okay, but I will send you that to have a look at. And here's the reasons why I sometimes fail. And, you know, we're writing a book, Fat Caterpillars, which is about why transformations fail and how to spot it. And these are the usual things that you find. It's usually there are, you know, lack of leadership alignment, or alternative agendas, or competing agendas pushing against each other. Usually you don't have timely feedback on progress, so people lose faith, or you can't evidence, and so funding dips away. There's usually fear. You know, people want to remain as is because, you know, that fear of the unknown. You don't have the capabilities, don't want to commit the resources. You've got too much going on. What you're trying to achieve with your transformation doesn't align with your purpose or values as is. We've got poor communication, a lack of a sell or a story. So you don't have a clear and compelling case for change. There are lots of reasons why it sometimes fails. But all of these things, think of this as a checklist of things to go through and say, have we got these things in place, or the opposite of these things in place, you know, to make our transformation, our adoption of lean principles successful? And lastly, let's come back to the myths. This is where we started. We're going to come back to them. So let's come right back full circle to our myths. And this is what we had at the start, okay? So we had, it's all about process, which becomes, it's all about people, okay? Hopefully you realize now that whilst process is a big part, it's all about the people, the customers first and foremost, but the people that do the work and enabling them to deliver continuous improvement. Lean is mean becomes deliver more value for your customers. Efficiency is a byproduct of adopting lean principles. It's not about cutting jobs. That does not align with the respect for people principle we talked about, because there is always more value adding activity to redirect your resources into delivering. It's a tool set, it's a continuous improvement philosophy supported by tools. The tools are incidental. As long as you can deliver those 5 stages outlined by Womack and Jones, you can use any tools you want. You can make them up. There are hundreds, you can find your own too. The tools are incidental, the philosophy is king. Okay, oh, I skipped one. It only applies to manufacturing, becomes it was first observed in manufacturing, but has been applied in the service sector for more than 30 years, and very successfully so. It's a project becomes, it's about creating a culture of continuous improvement. It never ends. You don't do lean, you become lean. And lastly, you need lots of expensive consultants, becomes they have a place. Of course, I'd say that. They have to get you started, but they should always be planning their exit and ensure skills are transferred into the organization. You need consultants for your proof of concept. You might need consultants to transfer the skills into your organization and culture people. But these are the sorts of things that the right experts can and should help you with, that advice, guidance, and support, that proof of concept piece, but then to transfer the skills and coach your people. And that seems like a good place to end. I really hope you found that interesting or informative. Let me pop my video back on now, because then I can See you all again. I hope you found that interesting and informative, and I hope it met your expectations for today. You probably got lots of questions. If you do, you can pop them in here. If you'd rather engage on a one-to-one basis, I'm very happy to do that. I love chatting about lean principles. So you can drop me an email, we can set up a call if that's what you'd like. But yes, feel free to follow us on these various platforms. If you sign up to our mailing list, you will see when we run these sessions, and we do we run several different sessions throughout a year, all of which are free and you can just book onto. So when you exit, please let me know if this session met your expectations, and let me know what we could do to improve, because that's the only way we can continuously improve these sessions and make them more valuable for you.